In this Maya 3D animation tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can use simple physics and math calculations to make a more realistic ball bounce by looking up how much different types of balls bounce after their first bounce. It doesn't mean that you can't have your ball bounce different. In fact, one of the great things about animation is that we can do things that are not real. But by starting from a real ball bounce based on physics, we can better change our imaginary animation worlds. To get started, we need to go to the internet to find out how different balls bounce. Here's a great web page about sports balls from the Exploratorium. The Exploratorium is located in San Francisco, California, and is a museum that you definitely should visit. For this demo, I'm going to pretend that my ball is a golf ball. If you look here, the height of the first bounce of a golf ball is 0.36, dropped from a height of a meter. That means it's lost 64% of its bounce height. So from the first height, it loses 64%. So let's go back to Maya. Here in Maya, I'm going to middle mouse button drag the front camera. Now I'm looking from the front. I'm going to select the main controller of the ball rig. Then I'll press W to move up, and I'm going to move up approximately 30 centimeters. Then I'll right-click on Translate Y and key select it. Now we need to find out how long does it take for this ball to fall to the ground. We know that we're 30 centimeters in the air. Then we can go to a free fall calculator. This will calculate how long it takes to fall. So I'll type in 30 centimeters. That means it'll take 0.24 seconds to fall. How many frames is 0.24 seconds? Then we can go to a timecode calculator. Make sure you change your frame rate to what you're using. I'm using 30 frames per second. Then we can type in 0.24. It'll tell us that it's 7.2 frames. That means we can move forward to 7 frames. Then select our main controller and type in 0 for its value. Right-click, key selected. Click in the timeline and press A. So now this is exactly how long it takes a ball in real life to fall 30 centimeters. How high will it bounce? Well, remember we found on the Exploratorium sheet that a golf ball loses 64% of its energy. We can go back to the internet and then we can look percentage decrease. So our initial value was 30. We're losing 64%, so we can type 64. That means the next bounce will only go up to 10.8. We can round to 11 to make it easy. So then, how long does it take to go 11? Well, we can calculate that here. We can say 11 centimeters is 0.14 seconds. Then we go to our time code and we type 0.14 seconds is 4.2 frames. So then we can move forward 4.2 frames or 4, so we can go to frame 11. Then we can go back and look, how high are we going? Well, we're going up 11. So then back in Maya, we can translate up 11, right-click, key selected. Click in the timeline, press A. So here we have the first bounce, lands on the ground, then goes up to 11. Notice that this is less than the first one. That's because it's losing energy. If this takes 1, 2, 3, 4 frames, then we can go to frame 15, and the ball will be back on the ground. We can press 0, then right-click, key selected, click in the timeline, and then see. Now you may think that from here to here, so from frame 1 to frame 7 looks about the same length as frame 7 to frame 15. Remember, we're only seeing half of the curve here because the ball starts in the air. We could continue to do all those calculations, but there's a slightly faster way. If we go back to the internet, notice that we know how many frames. It's 0.42. We also know the percentage decrease. We also know how high the ball will bounce. The ball will bounce back up 36% or 0.36 of the previous height. We can take the square root of this, and that'll be how long the time is. So we could go to the square root, and we can type in 0.36, and here we have 60%. Then we can find out what is 60% of 4, 2.4. So then we know the next bounce will only be 2.5 or 2 frames long. Now you kind of have to do some fudging. So for this, I'd probably go for 3 frames. We come back to the main controller and I go forward 3 frames. That brings me to frame 18. Then to figure out how high for each of the bounces, we can use this calculator that does the ball bounce all in one shot. So we can type in our first height, then the rebound ratio, 36, and then how many bounces. And if you look, you'll see the exact same numbers that we had with our other calculations. This is a good way to check your work. So the first one was 30, then the next one was 11, then it goes up 4. So that means here I'm going to go up 4. Then I'm going to right click, key selected. Then I'm going to go 3 frames forward to frame 21. And then we'll be back down on the ground, press 0, click on translate Y, right click, key selected. So now we're going down and we're only at 4. All we have to do is times the frames by 0.6. So if we go back to the percentage calculator, if we just had 2.4, so now we can just type 2.4, but we really use 3, so we'll use 3. And now it's 1.8. So the next one will be 2 frames. So that means I can go from 21 to 23. Then I can look at this calculator to see how high. This time it's only going to go up 1.3. So we can enter 1.3. I'm going to round up to 1.5 just to give it some bounce. Right click, key selected. We'll go forward 2 more frames to frame 25. And then this will be 0. Right click, key selected. So you can see how everything is getting slower as we go down. We're going to do, this is 1 bounce, 2 bounce, 3 bounces, 4 bounces, and this will be the 5th bounce. And this one will only go forward 1 frame. So I'll type 26. And then the height we can get from the web. The height is only half a centimeter up. So I'll type in 0.5. Right click, key selected. Then we'll go forward 1 more frame and we'll make it 0 again. Right click, key selected. So now we've done a pretty accurate modeling of our ball. So let's change the duration of our animation to 30. And then I'll press play. And so even with these spline keyframes, it still looks like the ball is coming to a stop abruptly, which is good. We can improve this by changing the keyframes. So let's shift select all of the bottom keyframes. Then we can break the tangents. And to get a quick approximation of the bounce, we can just click linear. That'll make them point towards the heights, which is giving it a pretty good arc. We can shift click all the top keyframes. We can break the tangents and then make them plateau. This should be at plateau, but this is good in case you've moved everything. Now let's take a look at the animation. Now it looks like the ball is really coming to a stop, and that's good. But we probably want to have some forward momentum on the ball. We can do that with the x-axis. So I'm going to move back to frame 1. On the x-axis, I'll right-click to key selected. So now we have a keyframe on the x-axis. Then I'll move the playhead all the way to the end. And I'll decide how far over do I want? How fast is the ball moving to the side? Let's move it about to here. And that's 14.6, so let's round up to 15. Right-click, key selected. Now let's just play that again. Now we can see the ball moves to the side, but we need to change the timing of the X direction. So I'll press pause. It's going to be much faster in the beginning than the end. So I want to break this tangent, and then I want to have it accelerating quickly and then tapering off slowly at the end. So let's see what that looks like. So that might be a little too much. I can bring this down. So now you can see that it's moving to the side quickly, but then it's starting to lose some of its velocity. At the very end, it'll still have some velocity, so we want to move out a little bit. If it took 27 frames to fall, let's go let's go to frame 40, and then we'll move the ball all the way to the cup. Right-click, key selected, and then it'll probably bounce off, so we'll go a few frames here, and then we'll bounce it back. Right-click, key selected, and now we'll make our animation duration 50 frames. Let's press play to see how that looks. Here we have the ball bouncing, and then it moves over and bounces off the cup. So we probably want to have the same deceleration with the second motion. So from right here to here. If we zoom in and I click on this keyframe, I'm going to break the tangents. And then the same thing, it's probably rolling faster and then it slows down when it gets to here. We don't want it to shoot past, so we want to make sure this is a flat keyframe. And then this is so short that it probably doesn't matter right now. So let's see how that looks now. It's probably a little far for this amount of time. We probably need a little bit more sideways movement, so I can raise this keyframe straight up. So now it covers more ground in the air. And you can adjust these keyframes in the graph editor very easily. So now let's add some rotation to the ball. Let's go back to frame 1. Then we'll twirl out the main controller and select the rotate controller. Notice that all our keyframes disappeared. We can go back to the main controller and we can pin the translate X and Y down. Then pick the rotate controller. We need to see which way it will rotate, so I'll zoom in a little bit. And if I press E and I rotate this way, I see the Z axis changing. So I can change this back to 0, then right click key selected. So now I have a rotate keyframe, and I'm going to go all the way to the end of the bounce. And we're going to say, how about negative 360? So it goes all the way around. Then right click key selected. So now if we play the animation, we'll see the ball is rolling as it bounces, but then it slides to the end. So we need to make it roll at the end as well. So let's stop. We know the ball has a diameter of 2 centimeters because that's the standard size ball that comes in. And we know to get to circumference, we can just multiply the diameter times pi. Pi is 3.14. So 2 times 3 is 6. So it's about 6 centimeters around. Let's see how far it moves. So if I click on the main controller and I look at translate X, right here it's 20.114. I could change that value to 20, then right click key selected, so it's easy to do math. Then I see how far does it go to get to the cup. When it's at the cup, it's at 24.8. So that's not quite all the way around because 6 is all the way around and this is 5. So that means if I select the rotate controller, I don't want to go a whole 360 around. That would be 720. So we could calculate exactly, but that's not necessary. We know that it's going to be a little less than all the way around. So let's try negative 670. Then we'll right click key selected and let's take a look to see how that goes. You can see that the ball is really spinning towards the end. So what we need to do is change this curve. If I select the rotate controller, I can break this tangent and then I can have it really taper off towards the end. Maybe that's a little too much. And then the same thing here. I want to select this controller, break the tangent, the rotate Z. And sometimes you don't want to see all the other controllers, so I can select just the rotate Z, break the tangent. And the same thing here. I want to have this coming down and really smoothing out. And this is probably too much here. And so again, this is a guesstimation, so it probably doesn't need to go all the way around like that. So we'll go back to the rotate controller and we'll stop it. And on this keyframe, we won't have it go all the way around. Because if you see here, we get to here. And this needs to slow down because you can see how we go past. This can happen sometimes. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one. And now it doesn't go past. And here we can still then break that tangent again after I set that to a linear. And then we can change this side to how we want it to be. So now we have it rolling into the cup and slowing down. Right here, if I select the rotate controller, I'll make this negative 500 and see how that looks. Right click, key selected. We'll press play again. So there you can tell that it's not enough. So it's somewhere between 670 and 500. I'll click this controller and just slide up the rotations. So now it's rotating and bouncing back. The last thing we need to do is set the squash. So we can do that by going to the very beginning. On frame 1, we can select the squash controller. And let's go look at the ball to see how it is. So when it starts falling, it's going to be at 0. So let's go ahead and right click on the squash attribute, right click, key selected. Then it's going to continue to fall all the way down to the first frame, right here when it hits the ground. So here it's going to be smashed, but right before it smashes, so one frame ahead of time, we can change the squash attribute. Remember, we can click on it over here in the channel box and then hover our mouse in the screen and hold control and drag with the middle mouse button. So I can stretch it out just a little bit. And then the squash controller is rotatable, so we can rotate it. But first, let's just set the stretch. Right click, key selected. Then we'll come down to actually squashed. Hold control, squash it down. Right click, key selected. Then we'll come back and we're going to go all the way up to right before the end. And we're going to go back the other way to stretch. Right click, key selected. Right at the top, it's going to be 0. Right click, key selected. Then we're going to come all the way down to the bottom. One frame ahead of time, we'll hold the control key and stretch it out a little bit. Right click, key selected. Then we'll move to the impact and we'll squash. Right click, key selected. And then we'll go all the way before, one frame before the top, and we'll stretch out again. Right click, key selected. Then at the top, it will be just a normal ball. Press 0, right click, key selected. Then we're going to move all the way to one frame before. Hold control and drag. We'll stretch a little bit. Right click, key selected. Then we're going to squash on impact. And all of these motions that I'm doing are highly exaggerate to show you how to set the keyframes. Then we'll move forward all the way one frame ahead of time is right here. So we just stretch a little bit. Right click, key selected. Will be 0 at the top. 0. Right click, key selected. Then we'll go all the way to the bottom. And here it theoretically should stretch just a little bit. Right click, key selected. Then we'll go here and it'll squash. Right click, key selected. And then when it comes up to the top, we probably want it to be 0 again. Right click, key selected. And then when it hits the cup, it's going to squash just a little bit. So I'll back off one. I need to set an initial value. Otherwise, it will start squashing this whole duration. So then I right click, key selected. You can see it keeps that value all the way across. If we look back at the beginning of the falling ball as it stretches, we're going to notice that the stretch is in the vertical direction. So what we can do is key its rotation. When we start moving forward, we can see this arch. So we're going to rotate it in the Z direction, something like this. And so how about 11 degrees? And so we can go back to the very first frame and we can key selected on frame 1. Then when we get to the bottom, it's going to be 0 degrees because it's squashing straight down. So we'll right click, key selected. Then as it comes off, it's going to be negative 11 degrees. We can then right click, key selected. Then at the top, so there it is. You can see here it's going up at an angle. Then at the top, it's going to be 0 degrees again. Right click, key selected. Then right after, it's going to be 11 degrees again. Right click, key selected. And it's going to go all the way down to the bottom. This is the frame where it hits. and then we're going to put this at 0, right-click, key selected. And then the next frame will be -11 again. And we'll right-click, key selected. And then we'll move up to the top. And then right here, it will be 0, right-click, key selected. And then we will continue to move until it falls. Then it moves forward. And again, we'll go to 11 degrees, right-click, key selected. And then we'll move to the bottom. It will be 0 again, right-click, key selected. It'll move up right away. For these last ones, there's only one frame, and so it's kind of ending, and I think that's fine. We roll to the coffee cup and bounce off. The last thing we need to do is make sure the ball changes its rotation direction after it bounces off the coffee cup. So it hits the coffee cup, and then it goes to here, and it's probably only traveling -470. We can right-click, key selected. Let's see how that looks. So we roll, hit the coffee cup, and then it rolls back the other way. Excellent. So now we can zoom out and take a look at our animation. Now if we press play, now we have a pretty convincing ball drop that uses physics to establish the heights of the ball. Of course, once you do this once, you can kind of get a feel for how a ball bounces, and you can make it up as you go along. Just know that each bounce will be lower and take less time, and then you can use these principles to kind of wing it and make your own ball bounce creations.